Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, September 19th. Okay, our first item on the agenda has been postponed. We were advised, so we'll move on to the update from Chief Kitzmiller. By the way, nice shirt, Ryan.
Nice Green Bay Packers shirt, I'll say. Whoa.
Well, the colors are showing.
Good afternoon. I want to bring you up to date on the PA.
Me? There you go. 4,686 actual violations were spotted by the cameras. We rejected a lot of those, as did Census Gatso, because either the plate wasn't clearly visible. Maybe the plate didn't belong on the car, or we had another car blocking the plate that we couldn't positively identify the offending vehicle. So we're being very judicious. We don't want to put out any citations to anybody that we're not absolutely sure about. Highway 100 and East Post Road. Again, that intersection was shut down for 2 or 3 days while they replaced a stoplight down there, but we had 1,108 red light violations and 127 speeding violations. The fastest speed we recorded, 97 miles an hour, going through the intersection down there, which if you can imagine the amount of traffic that goes through there, that's, almost a death wish. Highway 151 and Highway 13, we've had the numbers were a little bit off because we had trouble with one of the cameras trying to cover all 5 of those lanes coming into town on 151. They're still tweaking that a little bit, but we still wound up with 389 red light violations and 26 speeding violations. The mobile camera, we had that out 3 times for a total of about 60 hours. We had 320 noted violations in that 60-hour period. We did not issue any of those warnings because we had a glitch on the back end through Census Gatso. When they sent those to us, they were actually citations and not warnings. So we rejected them and sent them back. But of the citations or the warnings that we gave out, 77% of the vehicles are not registered in Marion. They're from outside of the city of Marion. I anticipate that number is going to change once we get the mobile unit up and running more, because it's mostly going to be deployed in neighborhoods responsive to community complaints. But I thought that was interesting to see that 77%. We had 74 repeat offenders, people that got more than 1 warning during the 3 weeks that I was tallying these. The lucky winner so far has been 3. We've got 1 individual who got 3 warnings for East Post and Highway 100. Overall, we're satisfied with it. We're happy with it. We should start getting the citations sent to us tomorrow. We'll start looking at those and see where we're at, and I'll come back again. We'll give it time to pull some more data up, and I'll bring it back to you and let you know how they're going. Any questions?
Questions for Chief? Yep, go ahead. Ray.
Thanks, Chief, for that update. I was wondering, is there any legislation or anything wrapped around the excessive speeding? So, this 97 mile an hour violation, rather than just be a misdemeanor, is there anything that can escalate anything that would be, for example, 25 miles per hour over the speed limit? I'm just kind of curious on the top end violations. That's not just a slip of the speed. That's a very robust statement from that
turn right on Highway 13. They just,
Just take the gravel. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chief, you just said that on Sunday, you're gonna post the week-long locations for the mobile
yes, sir.
unit. And our policy is 12 hours or 24 hours notice.
12 hours is in the policy. I was striving for 24, but we're gonna go a little bit beyond that.
Sure. So somewhere on the order of many multiple days, there's a heads up that the car is gonna be there, the unit's gonna be there. Is that a philosophy of acquainting and sort of retraining our residents as to really following our speed limits? Because my guess is if we acquaint people that we're watching for safety purposes, that incents them to do better according to the law. I'm just wondering if over time, we don't give that week-long notice. What I guess I'm just trying to decide is we're still in a period of acclimating people to this elevated enforcement, so that longer notification seems logical in my mind. But a year from now, I don't know that I would think that that's as logical.
I think that would be a decision council would have to make down the road. Like I know some agencies are using like old squad cars that they still put out and people are still blowing past it, you know, so it's just a matter of you gotta, again, I think them knowing that we're out there, we want to be transparent about it. We're not trying to be, you know, sneaky about where we're putting this.
Right. And I'm not suggesting a change. I'm just
No.
thinking about over time as our residents become more acclimated to this. Just a comment and then I'm done. You know, this information that you've shared with us this afternoon proves that we've had a problem. And hopefully we see improved performance against these kind of baseline numbers.
Chief, the one statistic that is a little surprising to me is that there's 3 times as many red lights at Highway 100 and East Post as there are on 13 and 151. I use both intersections quite a bit. And maybe you have to give me your definition again, because when I'm sitting there on 151 going east and watching these semis coming at me, turning south on 13, I mean, some of those have not started through the intersection and it's red, at least from the side I'm looking at. I'm ready, I get a green light and they're still just making the turn. So when does it, what's the definition and when the red light kicks in?
So when we get the red light violations, it'll actually tell you how long that light had been red before the front wheels cross the white line.
The front wheels
The
have
front
to
wheels.
cross.
Right, and
Okay.
so the problem we're having at 13 and 151 is that's so wide, and if you've ever seen where that camera sits, they're not very high off the ground. And I
Right.
think the camera is having trouble focusing in on cars going across, well, at that point, 1, 2, 3 lanes of traffic, a small median, and then the 2 left-hand turn lanes. And I think that's where we're coming in. I don't think that, I was like you, I was shocked that the
Yeah,
numbers were that far off, because I really thought 13 and 151, when we did our data checks, when we were out there counting vehicles by hand.
Yeah, to me, that's a very misleading
Yeah.
statistic. And I think maybe, I don't know if we need a higher camera on a pole or something, because all the comments I ever receive are always about that intersection, much more than 100 and East Post. So I think if the pole is that far back or an adjustment needs to be made based on what we're seeing there, I would certainly recommend we take a look at that, because that seems way off from my observations, and sounds like you're agreeing with that
Yes,
as
sir.
well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the one question I have, just because I noticed that the red light ones are a lot higher than the speeding ones. So if someone blows a red light, but they're also speeding, is that only considered the red light? Like we can, it's implied that some of those are speeding? Like
It
you
would
don't
do
get
both.
So would that count as both on the
It would.
stats?
Yeah.
Okay, so people are just blowing the red light at the appropriate speed?
Yeah.
That would be,
Okay.
that would be in both numbers.
Yeah.
That is shown.
Okay.
Okay, back to Will.
What was my question? Oh, at 13 and 151 are there 4 cameras? Is it every direction?
We get three directions we don't have going out of town. We don't have coming east on 151.
Okay.
Coming out of town,
So it's
going
just
back out
three
either
sides,
way.
okay.
Yep, the three
Okay.
sides,
Thank
both
you.
ways on 13 and coming into town on 151.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else, Chief?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Thank-
Next, we have Mr. Lucas. Well,
it off. So, we're here to talk about health insurance. Tonight, we're gonna be throwing a lot at you, but we have tried to boil this down to be as concise as possible. There are a lot of numbers in which we do summarize at the end, so just kind of want to give a heads up there. So as we start, I want to touch on vision insurance really quickly. There's not much difference here. We did see a 3% increase, but there's no city budget impact to the city, as this is a voluntary benefit for employees and they pay 100% of the cost share. So when we talk about the traditional plan, which is our current plan, we continued with our strategy and we're increasing we're recommending to increase the non-bargaining and ASME deductibles up to 1,000, 2,000 for a single family to match police and fire. This has been our practice in the past, and such. There are no changes recommended for the police and fire plans, given that they are locked into contract. So a few of the other changes that we want to talk about, when we talk about the specific stop loss, we are recommending increasing that from 50,000 to 75,000. And so what that means is when employees have a claim and it reaches 50,000, that's when insurance kicks over, but we're responsible for the first 50,000. And so we're recommending an increase. And so increasing that, we are on the hook for the first 75,000. However, on the flip side, our admin fees of the plan do go down, and that's where we see our cost savings. And so when we take a look at the past 3 or 4 years, we do have, when we take a look at those years individually, we do see on average, if we would have had the 75K stop loss, we would have saved on average about $110,000 each year. Again, it's going to be year by year basis. We're looking backwards for that data. So there's no way to really kind of predict what we would see, except for the data that we have. We are also recommending to partner with Prudent RX. So what Prudent RX is, it's a third party that they partner with Wellmark. What they do is they go out to the market and buy high cost prescriptions or drugs at a discounted rate. And then they take those and then they sell them to back to employees. So we would see less on the claim side, and then employees would pay less for those high prescription drugs. And we are also recommending removing the tobacco rate. Right now, we have a non-tobacco cost share and a tobacco cost share to have that tobacco incentive. So right now, we have 96 of our members are on non-tobacco plans. And so what our plan is here is to partner with the Employee Experience Committee to research more impactful ways where we can still have that tobacco education out there. But given that we have most of our members on that plan, we are recommending to remove it. So last year, or at least 6 months ago, we did talk about potentially moving to a 2-tier system. And so we conferred with legal. We do have all 3 of our union contracts up in June. And so what we're recommending is continuing on to the 2-tier, and we do plan on addressing the 4-tier through contract negotiations. And so then next year, we should be able to roll out the 4-tier with no problem. Okay, so this is still on the traditional plan. And so as you can see here, these are our premiums. Across the board, we saw a 1% increase or projected increase with our costs. which honestly is good, considering the market is averaging 8.5% increase. That is given that our last plan was a 6-month renewal, but still 1% is a really good number. And so you see on the screen kind of the premium breakdown that we would see on the employer side and then the employee side as well. Okay, so part of last year, our organizational goals was to kind of do an assessment on our health insurance. And so with that, the Employee Experience Committee got together and partnered with PDCM on additional plans. And where we came to was recommending a high deductible health plan. And so just to kind of give a high level overview of what a high deductible health plan is, it's kind of like car insurance where you have higher deductibles, but your premium goes down. So similar with this plan, deductibles for employees are going to be higher, but they're going to pay less per month. And then the other thing too is when you reach a deductible, you're done. Your deductible and your out-of-pocket max is the same amount. So the other benefit that kind of marries the high deductible health plan is then also introducing a health savings account, which is different than our flexible spending account, not to help confuse the two. So a health savings account, that is a pre-tax benefit to employees where they can contribute money and use that towards their medical qualifying expenses. And so with this, that is their money. Unlike FSA or flex spending, this is not a use it or lose it. This is theirs and it follows them. We are recommending partnering with Lively on the health savings account benefit. The contract for Lively would come through at a later date, but for now, we are still recommending going through Lively. And then in addition to the health savings account, what the employer can do is provide seed money. And what that is those are dollars that the employer can contribute on a January 1 basis for employees. So they have those dollars there right away. Some companies do this on an annual basis. They can do a matching program. When we met with the Experience Committee, we talked about a lot of different options that we could do. And we are recommending providing seed money. And I'll get to the amounts in the next slide. Okay, so this plan would still be through Wellmark. And as I mentioned, the deductibles and out-of-pockets, they're the same, but they are increased. And so we are recommending providing $1,600 and $3,200 respectively seed money for employees. So they'd have those dollars January 1 available to them to start the year out. And so when we're thinking about the amounts when we're doing seed money, while the high deductible health plan is projected to help with cost savings later, our goal this year is to help get that baseline. In years past, obviously we have not had this plan, and so we don't quite know how it'll perform. And so what our goal is this year is to break even and establish that baseline to help us move forward. And so when we talk about seed money, it's not uncommon for employers to contribute a little bit more to help employees with that adjustment from going from a lower deductible to a higher deductible for those that may have any needs in January. And so as you can see on the chart, you can see the difference in premium, both on the employer side and the employee side of what versus the traditional versus high deductible health plan. And so when we take a look at budget impacts, as I mentioned, we are seeing a 1% increase on the traditional plan. And so, and then you can see there on the screen what we would save with the high deductible health plan or projected savings. When we take all these pieces and plug them together, it's really hard to nail down a specific number as far as what we're specifically going to save or cut costs. But we are projecting around $143,000 in savings. Again, this is kind of a year that we wanted to break even to establish that baseline. And then this is another summary plan or summary slide kind of just going briefly over the changes that we are recommending to make for this renewal. Are there any questions? I know that's a lot.
Lucas, you did a great job on that. That's a lot of information, isn't it?
Thanks.
Do you know when the HSAs came out?
No.
No, 2003. So it's 20 years old. So it's been around for quite a while. The HSAs, I'm really excited to see the high deductible option come out available for the employees, because that's not only it's not only an incentive from the employee's perspective, but also the employers. I was just kind of running some quick numbers here. The national average is $840 a year savings on a single employee, and about $1,700 a year for family having an HSA. The other huge component on the HSAs for employees, and for those that aren't familiar with them, is that is qualified money that's been pre-taxed, and those individuals can carry that into retirement. So HSAs are a really, really beneficial tool. I highly recommend to my clients that are, to the point where your children are gone, there's a little bit more disposable income, and obviously you have that discretionary money to pay for those larger out-of-pocket expenses. But it's a really great tool for people in their financial wealth management, not only from an administrative situation, but also too from an individual. So, and I've done some research as well too. Those individuals within our organization that have been looking at it, kudos to you, your department, the staff. That is a huge undertaking to understand that, to educate them. And I know there's been a lot of people jump on board with trying to become educated with it. So it's a fantastic product. And I'm super excited to have that in our portfolio for our staff. Again, another great tool, going to be a huge savings, not only to the city, but to the employees as well. So nice job.
Well, I've been in your shoes before, responsible for the health insurance, so a little different than Randy. He's on the other side of the fence selling it. But to work on the design, I've always said health insurance is like a foreign language. Not everybody understands it. It takes a lot to understand it. And that's one, with all the changes you're proposing, I know the amount of work you and everybody else has gone through to reach this point, especially those are a lot of changes. I agree with Randy. I think they all make a lot of sense. The private industry has been there, at least a decade ago. So you're just catching up and giving them some alternatives, I think, that are important. The biggest thing it all does is one of the top goals is to make the employee a better health consumer, to be smarter with not only the city's money that they're spending, but now all of a sudden they have a lot more of their own money potentially in it that they are responsible for and that they can manage. So I think that makes them smarter. I think they're going to be a better consumer for everything that they do. So I support everything you do. The one thing that surprised me was on the tobacco side, that 90%, you're saying 96% of the Marion City employees are non-tobacco?
Correct.
Yeah, I find that to be extremely high. So that's good. I'm glad to see that. Then that's way, way above the national average. I think national average is probably what, 85%? Does that sound right? 83, yeah.
Yep.
So, that to me is a very good statistic there too. So I understand why you're trying that. My personal preference is not to give tobacco users a break. That's my personal preference, but you're at 96%. So if you want to work on some other plan for a year, I don't think I would completely ignore that in the future. We'll see what happens, but I think everything from an overall perspective, everything you're presenting looks really attractive, and I like the work that everybody's done.
Lucas, if we could back up, maybe just a slide, maybe one more. Okay, this is it. How does this approach compare with some of our comparables, and maybe even, and maybe it's impossible to know that, or how does it compare to some of our competitors for resources, both bargaining and non-bargaining unit. I guess, how does this put us in a competitive position relative to our marketplace?
So that's a great question. In our Baker Tilly report, at least on the traditional side, our rates are pretty competitive with what we're seeing in the market. There, with our competitors or our comparables cities, there's insufficient data for the high deductible. However, that being said, taking a step back from our comparables and even looking at this from a recruiting perspective, we now have more leverage to recruit that talent. And so when employees do have their own HSAs and their own employers, they can now roll those HSAs into our plan or, with our plan. And so making it more desirable a benefits package. So that does help with the recruiting.
I think more specifically, what he might have been asking is the percentage paid by the employer versus the employee. How does that compare to
I don't,
other?
yep, that's a great question. I don't have that data specifically, but I can research that.
If I can share anecdotally, this, as Councilman Sternad and Jensen had mentioned, this is an area where public sector has been lacking and not keeping up with the private sector. I've been in part of organizations, Councilman Sternad, I was part of an organization where this was rolled out about 20 years ago, and it was new then and still in the public sector, it's still fairly new. But what it does is the 12% is typically what you would, is familiar with what I've been seeing in my experience over the last, for the employee contributions is 12 to 15%. But from this standpoint, it does allow us to be more competitive because it does bring down that premium. So employees are able to take home more. They're also able to be more flexible with how that money is being utilized. And just, it allows them, I mean, one of the things that we heard, we've already had a couple employee forums on this to make sure that our employee base was familiar with this. And some of the things that we heard from some of the folks towards the end of their career, they're like, you know what, this is great because now at least I know I can start planning for retirement and not have to worry about this kind of cost. So this gives me the ability to transition to that next phase of my life. Whereas kind of on the younger side, it's like, okay, great, I can pocket more money, I can better manage my health care, and if I'm taking care of all the things that I need to, I can be saving up and build that nest egg. So then when I do need it, I'm not really feeling that pinch like I would under the traditional because I now have to pay out of pocket or I have to go through this cumbersome process with the FSA to submit receipts and then reimburse it. And then, those receipts didn't materialize. So I have to resubmit and have other documentation. So it really kind of creates a seamless process for our employee base.
There's a other small benefit with the HSA, and that is when you contribute to the HSA, you can then take those dollars and then invest it in the market and have that grow. And so that was another benefit that Lively provided. And so employees will be able to start investing their money. There's no minimum, and we can go over Lively more specifically when we send through the contract. But that will be a benefit to employees that they can start investing those dollars that are submitted into their HSA.
Go ahead.
I don't want to belabor this because I know we're kind of in agreement and I know we have a long agenda, but I'm going to speak to this not from the employer side of it or from the insurance side of it. I'm going to speak to it from someone who has had an HSA through my husband's employment since the early 2000s when these were first coming out. And for people who are going on to this, and I don't like change, and we had 3 young children, and I'm like, what are we doing? What are you talking about? And he likes to research all this, but we moved to that, and it has been one of the best things we have ever done. We're not chasing the year end. We've had, our daughters had 2 hip surgeries that all of ours was paid for, taken care of through this. We have done glasses and all the appointments and all that. I mean, it is such a great way that you feel in control of those funds, and the incentives that allow you to put the money into that and not have that deadline looming. So it is, even though it just sounds like it's kind of ominous, it has really been a great benefit through our young children up to now that they're all going off of our plans. And now here we are with it. So if anybody needs a testimonial on the fact that it was okay, despite the fact I don't like change and I was a little resistant, it has been over decades and we love it. So thank you for doing that.
Well, go ahead.
2 little questions. What does a 4-tier plan mean?
That's a good question. So two-tier, we have our single plan, and our family plan. Four-tier, we would divide it out even further to single, employee spouse, employee children, family.
Okay.
And so there would be more of that cost breakdown.
Sure.
And when the committee got together, and we are recommending moving to a four-tier plan, just this year is not the right time to do that. We wanted to embrace our equity statement that we recently adopted, that it's more equitable. People are paying the premiums that they have for their dependents.
Sure. Okay, thank you. And then seed money, is that a one-time? It's just this one, it would be just one time and then
Yeah.
never again.
Seed money, what our plan is to evaluate this on a yearly basis. It really depends on plan performance. And so we've let employees know that right now, we're agreeing to the 1,600, 3,200, but that might be subject to change in the coming years as we finally gauge a plan. But then also the structure might change, where right now we're doing seed money, we're doing just one lump sum payment. Otherwise, we could do like a monthly matching program. And so there are different ways that we can structure that, but it will be assessed on a yearly basis.
And that's something that's common with these, is to do seed money every year.
It depends on the organization,
Sure.
but yes.
It varies, it varies on the performance of the plan.
Okay.
I mean,
And-
Councilman Jensen mentioned it's a consumer-driven plan. That's the other name that it's called, because the employee has a stake in the plan and the performance of it. And if they're better managing their healthcare, the plan is going to perform better, which is going to keep the renewals later or lower, flatter in the out years, which is benefit for the organization and for the employee. And then so what that then gets, you evaluate it year over year to say, okay, how have we performed? How much, because it allows us to even go higher with the deductible as a strategy to further reduce costs to employees and to the organization if it's performing better. So we will be looking at it on an annual basis and developing recommendations on that annual basis. But it has been, it's been understood by the engagement committee that what is being recommended here and now is for this plan year only. It doesn't necessarily guarantee this would be the levels, if at all, for the out years. But we want to make sure that we're engaging with our committee. We're making sure we're looking at the data and developing those recommendations and providing that to the council.
Ready?
One last question, Lucas. Can you refresh my memory? I know we just had recently moved up our stop gap limit. Do you recall, was it 10,000 and then we went to 45? Do you?
Stop loss?
Yeah, the stop loss. Do you recall? Because we just recently moved that up.
We did, I believe, I'd have to double check, it was at 40. Yeah, it was at 40 the year prior, and then we moved it to 50
Okay, very
with
good.
the understanding that we were going to look at it this year.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So Lucas, the seed money, and this is the recommendation starting out, and experience will help us adjust that as needed going forward. So allocating that seed money, as you've indicated, if that's not tapped by the employee, does that carry forward into the next year and the following year?
Correct.
Okay, all right, great, thanks.
Did you still have something, Ryan?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, especially for the viewing audience at home. We're talking about the benefit for the employee, which we want to take care of our employees. Our employees are our number one resource. They're the ones that help us effectuate the vision for Team Marion to reach higher, right? What this does for the community standpoint as an organization, it helps us to keep our costs lower. And as we've all talked about during the budget process, we've got several different levies. The employee benefits levy, of which health insurance goes on, is uncapped. So what this does is, if we can better control our costs here, that translates to a lower levy request needed in the out years. So this is part of a long-term strategy, not to just provide our employees with a comprehensive benefit package, but also from a strategy to make sure we're being fiscally responsible with the taxpayer dollars. So if we manage our healthcare better, we control those costs, and those costs go down, the residents will see it, on their tax bill.
I'm sorry, I got one more question. I kept saying that was it, but this is a deep subject for us. This seed money that we're talking about, there's a couple things that are moving targets there for me that concern me a little bit. Obviously, for the single individual, an HSA has a cap of $38.50 per year. Over 55, they can add an extra $1,000 to that. Our contract renews, our health is renegotiated every July.
So we're recommending a renewal for a year. And so, part of the strategy was moving the health insurance renewal to a calendar year.
Okay,
And
so
so-
moving that to January,
Mhm.
okay. And do we have a ballpark idea as to what that, I kind of equate this to almost being like a profit sharing plan, right? The healthier we are as a group, the more we all win, the more proceeds are gonna be there. But I'm assuming we're not gonna be anywhere near, are we talking $100 a year? Seed money, I don't know. This seed money it's kind of a wild card, and I'm kind of just wondering in my mind, how's that broken down, and are we talking about that going into the HSA, or is there a separate pot that we're putting the seed money into?
So, this will be coming out of the health insurance fund, but it kind of goes back to when we're talking about this, it's really hard to estimate because we're talking mid-plan years. And so when we do our reporting, half the year is going to be on, one plan, and then the other half is going to be on another plan. And so that's part of the challenge in nailing down a certain dollar amount. And so what we can do is, what we are doing is relying on our past plan data to help provide what those projection savings might be. And so that's why when we have this year, this will really help us. I mean, it's kind of a shot in the dark, right? So we're aiming to help break even to have that baseline. So at least we can kind of get an idea of maybe what we would be looking at for the budget, even though now the fiscal years and obviously the calendar aren't aligned.
Right, okay, and thank you for that, because I was just, typically what would happen in an employer's plan is they would actually, in some cases, they would be able to payroll deduct, hypothetically $200 a month from payroll deduction into the HSA account. That gives them, their allotted money for the actual entire year's contribution towards the HSA, but then we would have this seed money too that was coming back into place. So thank you. I know there's a lot of details in there, and there's more information to come, and I appreciate all that. Just some details. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Right, Steve.
One more quick question based on what you just talked about, Lucas. Did I understand you correctly or not? That one plan is going to be on a calendar year basis and the other plan is going to be on a fiscal?
Nope, both years are going to calendar year.
Okay,
My point was just that they're not aligned. The fiscal year not.
right now they're not.
Correct.
Okay, but they're both, okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Very good. I didn't want to be confused on that because otherwise I might have said something else.
Yep.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay,
Cool. Thank you.
thank you. Next, city manager has a update on Willow Creek drainage.
Yes, I will start this and then I will turn it over to Mike Barklow and Matt Morris. So as council knows, one of the things that we're really trying to do is, one, reach higher with our customer service, but also one of the ways we're doing that is making sure that we're engaging all teammates throughout the organization and just having them have an opportunity to present their good work. So one of the issues that last year, Councilman Jensen and members of Team Marion were involved in a resident neighborhood concern in Willowwood Creek in this drainage area that's on the slide before you. So we worked with Public Services, HR Green, engineering firm to develop some recommendations, and then we kicked it off and turned it over to our Public Services team that took advantage of it. So we want to talk about the good work that our team did, and then also there's another item on later on the agenda where we want to recommend taking this and expanding out to the larger community. So I'm gonna be quiet and let our teammates talk about it.
For your general reference, under consent agenda E4 and E5, so we're going to talk about both those items. So E4 is to receive and file the actual drainage report, and then E5 is a motion directing staff to solicit an RFP for a stormwater plan. And so we're gonna go through a few details. So the E4 item is actually the area that's bound by what you see on the screen. So this is the area that we had Green come in and do the analysis on. And with this is the recommendations that they gave us. If you were to add up all of these from the minimum to the maximum, you're talking about $191,000 to $363,000 worth of improvements just in that small area. Obviously, we don't have that money just laying around to do that much for improvements. So Matt Morris went out with his crew, and this is what they've done so far. So I'm gonna let Matt talk about the settlement basin that they've built so far. And
So what we did is went out originally and there's a section that if you go back, can I go back? Yep. Right here. So about right here is where we stopped. There's it's right here. There's a yard that's actually really nice. From here back to 35th Street, we cleaned that stuff up, got all the sand and debris out. We actually dug it out, poured the cement basin, and actually what this is gonna serve as a sand trap to catch all the sediment so it doesn't go down into the yards. And then, yeah, we're just gonna reseed it down and then on a yearly or bi-yearly schedule, clean the sand out of it.
But by the operations of what they come up with by pouring this in concrete, then they can come in there with either a skid loader and scoop that sand out, or they could take their suck truck and just suck it out. But that way we're not having to deal with all the soils and all that stuff. And so this is likely something that will be proposed in other locations as well. So we're taking what we've done here and we want to build a stormwater master plan similar to our HDR plan that we have for our sanitary sewer, so that we can map that out and start putting that stuff in the CIP so that we don't have a surprise of, hey, you guys need to go out and spend $500,000 on this waterway. We can actually have a game plan moving forward of, we need to start being strategic about this. And again, looking forward rather than reactionary. So we just wanted to bring city council up to date. Those are what we propose moving forward on those two items, but we're open for questions.
Questions, go ahead.
Was that done on, is that city-owned property or is that in the residential property?
It's our right of way,
The right away or is it city-owned?
city.
It is city, okay. So I can walk back there and take a look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Willowwood Creek. I don't remember if you recall, we had,
Yeah,
it was a couple years ago, some residents came in because they were cleaning it with their kids.
Yep.
And they named it.
Right. Yep.
So it's a Blue Lion stream.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Grant and then Steve.
Yeah, Matt, I remember long ago in a galaxy very far, far away, a friend moved into a house there. And there was just a huge torrent of runoff that used to go in through there.
Yeah.
And then subsequently it became overgrowth and the like. I just want to commend you guys for doing this work to clean it up, because it was a hazard, it's an eyesore, and this just is an improvement in many different ways. So I just think that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so the one thing you didn't do yourself justice on, you should have done a before and after picture.
Well, I have
Because-
the 4 pictures in the HR green.
Yeah, you've got them, but if people here had seen the before
Oh,
and look what you did,
no.
I am absolutely amazed by the talent of your team.
Yeah.
Because what you accomplished here has been phenomenal.
And for very little cost.
Exactly. I mean, the city employees did this work. I've been monitoring that. I drive by that all the time. I had to walk by it so I could walk up to it and down in it and see what's happening and looking at the different stages. So the neighborhood thinks it's fantastic. They're very happy with it. I talked to the neighborhood spokesperson
Yeah,
and she is thrilled.
I know.
So anyway, congratulations.
A few times.
Yeah, job well done.
Thank you.
So what other neighborhoods or areas would you see this?
So that's
appropriate
why
for?
we're gonna do that master plan. So we're
Yeah.
gonna look at the entire city.
Does this help that waterway that's off of 35th Avenue that goes through the backyards? Maybe
So-
down into this, I don't know, but
Yeah, so this one is, to give you a reference, this is the pool right here.
Yeah.
So this
oh no,
is
this,
35th.
so this is it.
Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the same one. Okay. Well, that's good. They should be really happy.
There's still work to do.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you for all your work. Appreciate it.
Ready for the next item? Yes. All right, so I have the next one too. So we're gonna talk about the stormwater utility. So Steve Cooper came and gave this presentation. This was his slide that he put together. So basically, we used to have an ordinance that encompassed everything in it. And so if we ever wanted to change rates or look at different best management practices that we do, we would have to go through 3 readings to make those modifications. So we've already had the first reading of the ordinance where we kind of stripped those out and we're proposing to put those into policies. And we're going to talk about those 2 policies today. That way that for the 3rd reading, we can do the ordinance and then adopt the 2 policies, assuming city council is good with them. So there's 2 policies. One is our standing operating procedure. So this is where right now, some people get a bill from the water department, some people get a bill from finance. And so we're trying to streamline that, effective and efficient government, get that all so that it comes from the water department on that bill. And then the other one is actually talking about our best management practices. So right now, for rebates, there's $50 for 1 rain barrel, $350 for soil quality restoration, and $400 for rain gardens. What we're proposing to do is actually expand that. So we've put about $10,000 in our budget each year for this rebate program. And I can tell you as a city engineer, I've yet to spend that $10,000. So you wouldn't think that'd be much for people to spend, but they're just not. And so what we're proposing to do then is to add $50 per rain barrel, which is what we had before, but make it so you can have 3 of them. So instead of just 1 rain barrel, you can have 3 rain barrels. $50 per tree, up to 3 trees per parcel. So just because you're required to have the 1 tree in your front yard to get your occupancy permit does not mean we want to reach towards the bottom. We want to reach higher and put more trees in there. Rain gardens, soil quality restoration, pervious paver, and native vegetation, we would propose that we do a reimbursement of half the cost up to $1,000. So for example, I know I got a quote from Quality Care to do mine and it was a little over $2,000 to do my entire yard. And that's where they go in with, it's either 6 or 8, it's deep tine aeration, to put the long plugs in there to get that so that the water infiltrates into the ground rather than runs off. And so this not only benefits me as a homeowner, but it benefits all my neighbors. And so the more of this stuff we can do, the more trees we can plant. We can get our canopy back up that we lost during derecho. So there's a lot of good health quality things that we're doing with this program. So that's what we're proposing. If there's questions, we do have the actual policies in the council packet, but we can go through those items, but that's what staff is proposing.
Go ahead. Well,
So with natural vegetation, you said, isn't there a policy in place though that you have to have your lawn manicured and so short, so you can't have like a rain garden with natural vegetation growing in areas in your front yard? I think I remember us talking about that.
I don't know that off the top of my head. I mean, I can tell you, like in my backyard, at least that's on the city property, that's designated an area that has the tall grasses, tower terrace, for example, the medians there, we've planted in
Sure.
the pollinators. I don't know if Sunbridge knows off the top of his head, but
Yeah, we do have an ordinance that applies to weed complaints and unkept properties. It specifically states that grass can't be over 8 inches in height. And then it speaks more specifically to noxious weeds that are called out in the Lynn County Weed Commissioner's Guide. We can go out and identify different species of plants and things like that that would be acceptable and allowable in this. And it really is kind of a case by case, but there are things that are acceptable, that are native, natural plants, and things that are not, that are more classified as weeds and things like that.
Okay, so you can have the taller grasses and whatnot.
Correct.
Throughout
That
your
is,
front yard.
as long as it's approved and we don't find unacceptable species within that mix, it can be allowed, yes.
Okay.
there may need to be big education program along with that though, because I have had people complain to me about their neighbor having, native grasses in their backyard and they call them weeds. And well, we've had somebody complain about the medians with all the weeds, mow down the weeds. So we may need to be more aggressive about putting out the information about the benefits and the reasons for this, for promoting that, and what's the difference between permissible vegetation and weeds. So.
We can certainly do that.
Any other questions? Okay. Anything else, Mike?
No.
Thank you. David?
Right, before I get started, put some information in front of you. This is all information I emailed out last week. Just thought you might want a hard copy for it tonight. I do apologize for the Excel sheet. It got a little fine print on that, but again, that is what was sent to you by email, so you can blow it up if you wish. So that'll be all the responses I got. I plugged into one sheet so everybody could see who responded to what, and where we got some overlap on some of the items, and where some of the items were basically okay, or where some of the items were only brought up by one individual. But we'll hit them all eventually. But tonight we're going to focus on just a few areas of that report. So beginning off, map on the screen is in front of you as well. And it does reflect all the commercial and manufacturing uses within the community, not including the central corridor. That's a separate map in front of you. So today we're mainly going to focus along Tower Terrace Road Corridor, Highway 13. There'll be a little overlap in the central corridor because several of you brought that up as a specific item on some of these uses. Received quite a few responses, so thank you. We had a lot of items highlighted. So I've kind of created 4 buckets here that we're going to discuss. We're only going to focus on the first 3 columns tonight. The first 2 state code requirements and appropriate zoning, only a few minutes on. Then we'll go into the multiple response ones, and these are about the dozen or so responses that at least 2 of you had indicated you wanted to learn a little bit more about or discuss. And then there's the final one with the single response. We don't have to ignore those tonight. We can sure talk about some of them specifically if you want, but that'll be another presentation in the near future to go over those ones that just only one council member responded to. So focusing on the first column, state code, I think everybody had highlighted fireworks stands as a use we want to regulate. Again, unfortunately, the state says we got to have them everywhere that we have commercial, or I'm sorry, we have retail uses. So that is all of our commercial areas, our central corridor, as well as our manufacturing districts. So if you can sell something somewhere, you've got to allow the fireworks sales, and the tents, the stands, are just going to have to be allowed. States kind of tied our hands behind our back, nothing we can do on that issue. And I'm sorry, as I go on the slides, if you have questions, every slide, we can hit every slide, talk about every slide if you want, instead of waiting until the end. The next item, the next column that we're looking at will be appropriate zoning districts. These are the districts that really, these are the uses that you had indicated, hey, we'd like to see this, or we don't want to see that. So we identified all those uses, and all those on the green on the chart, on the graph in front of you, and what I emailed to you, those are all uses that you called out, but the zoning does allow for them, or it specifically does not. You didn't say, we don't want to see heavy manufacturing in our commercial districts. Yeah, the zoning doesn't allow that. So we took those out and said, yep, Tower Terrace, Highway 13 is zoned appropriately to prohibit those uses. There was quite a few government agencies that are prohibited in our commercial districts, but those would be local or school partners, county partners, state, federal partners. They're allowed. We have a special zoning district for all those governmental uses. We want to encourage them we'd rezone that to our public institutions district, and that would reflect the very specific use, a governmental use on a property. So adjacent property owners would know exactly what's going on. So it's not necessarily, I say it's not allowed in the commercial district, and they're not, but those are uses that we'd want to rezone. So again, the public's very well aware of this land use is for public use or public institutional use. If it wants to change to commercial or residential, it's got to go through a rezoning process. Very transparent, very public engaging.
And they have, those folks will have the opportunity to come and speak on zoning it to a public institution or taking it back down to something that's public or I'm sorry, residential or commercial. So it's very transparent use. Again, also one more example, live entertainment, that's allowed. I think a couple of people flagged that we wanted to have this. All our Tower Terrace, Highway 13, Central Corridor districts allow for live entertainment. So we have kind of removed those from the list to make the list a little bit more manageable. Now we're gonna look at bucket number 3, and these are all the uses that had at least 2 responses that I received. And we're gonna go a quick high level of each use. I can give you the definition if you like of each use. I can talk to you about the additional standards, where they're allowed, where they're not allowed. If you have specific concerns or specific questions, now would be the time to ask when we talk about those uses. And then at the end, we can before we end every slide, take your comments and figure out a path forward for those uses. So starting off, motor vehicle sales, minor repair, and motor vehicle sales, major repair. Minor repair, I'm gonna use local examples. Is your Goodyear, your Jiffy Lube, Anderson Automotive. They perform service within about 5 days. Major repairs are gonna be your auto body, such as Quality Auto, Wade's Auto, Collision Center over on Blair's Ferry. These are they have typically a 45-day vehicle is allowed to sit. So those are the two repair businesses. Minor is allowed along Tower Terrace Road and Highway 13 in the BC and BR zoning districts, as well as our manufacturing zoning districts. The major, the auto body services are allowed in the manufacturing districts as a conditional use. So they get extra review even in our industrial districts, primarily because they're wrecked automobiles sitting out for 45 days in somewhat public view or potentially within public view. Both of these uses have the standards like I talked about, length of time, screening from the public right away, work has to occur inside. A lot of businesses, you can do business outside. These uses specifically have to be interior work. So the big one taken away on this one is minor repair is allowed in our BC and BR districts. So it would be allowed along Tower Terrace Road or Highway 13. The question to ask would be, is a motor vehicle service repair minor something you want to see along our Tower Terrace Road corridor or Highway 13 corridors? Any questions on motor vehicles? Okay.
Oh,
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead. We have one.
You bring up Tower Terrace and Highway 13. What about Central Corridor?
Yeah, they're not permitted within Central Corridor. Neither are.
Neither.
So we have a lot of existing uses. I should have brought that up. We have a lot of existing uses, a lot of existing minor and major that are in our corridor or in some of these districts. So as the council looks to give us direction is if they say, hey, we don't allow this use in this zoning district anywhere. It's not just about the bare ground out there. It's about existing businesses as well. We'd have to look at and say, what impact does removing that use from that district have on the rest of Marion? So we gotta look forward about that as well when we're talking about uses.
So let me bring up one. So we had that site on 7th Avenue and next to the DQ, or let me see, it used to be the DQ, I think it's Barker's now.
Yep.
Okay, so that has now been abandoned. It used to be a car lot or car sales lot.
Yep.
So what is our policy that after that is in not being used for that for 6 months, then it can no longer be used for that again? Is that
Yes, but I don't know the date off the top. of my
something
head.
like that?
It's a 6 month, I don't want to misquote,
Yeah,
it, but
yeah.
yeah, there is a period of time, correct.
Period
And
of
once that
time, if it's not
expires,
used for that, then it's,
it has to be a conforming use.
right, okay, very good.
And I will find out the length of period for that.
Yeah, that one sticks in my mind. It's been abandoned for a while, or at least everything's gone from that site, so.
Yeah, so once that period expires, then it can only be a conforming use of that underlying zoning district, which is not auto sales.
Yeah, thanks.
The second, probably most highlighted item from the responses I got were car washes and gas stations. Starting with car washes, they're allowed as a conditional use in both the BC, so along Tower Terrace Road, and permitted within the BR, so Highway thirteen, portions of 151, obviously the bypass, and then allowed in the manufacturing districts. Is permitted within the UC1 Central Corridor District, and that is really pretty much the Burger King East, is where car washes would be allowed in that UC1 district, as well as the Casey's on the west side of town near Jiffy Lube. I believe has the same similar zoning. So it's allowed in our corridor, and that was solely because we had existing uses within the corridor. Gas stations are conditional use in the BC along Tower Terrace Road and the BR districts along Highway 13. They're permitted in the manufacturing districts along Highway 13 as well. They're conditional use in the corridor. Obviously, we have several gas stations within the corridor. Keeping them a conditional use allows them to maintain their legal status. Both have additional standards for their operation. I can go into those if you'd like, but it's mostly separation, canopy, orientation, outdoor storage, outdoor sales is additional standards that those are regulated in. Questions on either?
Go ahead.
Dave, when we say gas stations, aren't we really talking about combination gas station and convenience store?
The model today, yes.
I mean,
A convenience store is allowed without the pumps. I got a 7-Eleven in the big cities. That would be an allowed use as a retail sales. So it's really about the pump function of a convenience store or standalone gas station, like a co-op type of use.
I have a different question, but I'll save it until you get done with your primary presentation.
Yeah, on the car wash, you're saying it's permitted within the UC1 Central Corridor District. We have had previous discussion here at a previous city council meeting where we rejected the idea of a car wash within that district. So is that something that we need to be considering a change?
This is one of the highlighted ones, yes. I mean, again, we kept it, when we adopted the code, we kept them permitted because we had at least 2 or 3 car washes
Yes.
already in the district, so we wanted to maintain the legality of those. But going forward, if you want to review car washes in that district, that's something we should probably flag and bring back either new standards or amendment to the code eventually.
If I can.
And that was tied to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, the one that council denied was subject to another layer of regulations via a development agreement.
Yes.
That contemplated a different use, and so there was that deviation.
Yeah, it was more
From-
parcel specific.
Yeah, it was parcel specific. So-
Without that, the additional layer of the
Right.
development agreement, they could have gone in, pulled a building permit, did the design review, and as long as they met the standards, they would have been able to operate.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up to that, similar to how you use the differences between gas stations with pumps, like convenience stores. Are there differences in like types of car washes, like Mister's or Tommy's, like full self-serve?
No, we
Not
call,
self-serve, but then
there
versus
is, by
self-serve.
definition, in our several different communities codes, there are, Marion, we just kept it simple as a gas station, or a car wash is a car wash.
Go ahead.
Even if it's tied to a gas station?
Correct.
Okay.
It'd still be conditional, like a gas station may be permitted, but then the car wash should be a conditional use.
That would have.
Or,
to get
or vice versa, depending on the other districts, yeah.
One more comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the other one, talking about gas station and convenience stores, and we were talking about a conditional use in the UTC2 district. Again, I think we've got plenty of those at the east end. And I would be concerned about seeing too many more of those at all in the central corridor. Fine, maybe one on the far west end, but I don't know how everybody feels about that. I would be concerned about, if we were talking about limiting something within that central corridor, that's one item I would consider wanting to be eliminated or controlled. Looking for comments from anybody else.
I would agree with that. Not I wouldn't say necessarily limited, but have it where it would have to come through for review. Know what I mean?
I,
Is that what you mean, or like?
no, I'm fine. My comment, I'd like to see them, not even allowed in UTC two in that central corridor. I think you don't have to have a convenience store every half mile or every 6 blocks, okay? You've already got 3 at the east end of town, or at the east end of this corridor. And I think you got plenty, you got some on the west end, so I think enough is enough. I'd hate to see it dotted with convenience stores all the way through that central corridor. So that, I don't know how, there's only a certain number of locations they could get enough land. Probably to do that would have to be probably on the south side of 7th Avenue. You know, find some location they could do it, but again, that's a personal concern. I would like to see limited.
We'll talk about some of the strategies for that at the end tail end.
Okay.
And we'll bring a few other folks in to help me with that. Any other questions?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So Dave, this is the question I just kind of held off on. As I just look at the map and I'm looking at the depiction that shows where Cornhenge is.
Hmm.
I don't see any designated zoning immediately adjacent to Cornhenge.
Correct.
Do we not have any, or?
We do. We have the plan unit development, the PUD process. That's got its own special overlay. That's completely separate from the zoning code itself or the zoning ordinance itself. The traditional zoning regulations we have, it has a PUD that has its own regulations layered on top of that. So they have their own, the council's developed their own standards for that specific area. It does allow convenience stores, but it's the PUD process. So that's something that you as a council would get to see when normally you might not see a site plan or a conditional use. You would get to see that review.
Okay.
So anything PUD has not been included on that map. So it's Highway 13 and 151 with the East Town Crossing, the neighborhood of Indian Creek, and then Metco are the 3 big ones not shown on that map. Again, because they have their own layer of uses, its own layer of design above and beyond the code.
Okay, all right, so I guess then for that immediate area, we will evaluate that under a different set of rules.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Popular one. Next two, pawn shop got brought up a few times, and then liquor, tobacco, and vape is one of the uses I added because I've been quite the conversation in the community, and I have received a few calls, and I'm sure some of you have received calls on that as well. So I took liberties with your list and added that one myself. So pawn shops are they are called out separately. They're not a standalone retail shop, basically because of the way they have to report their merchandise, where a normal retail store does not. They're permitted within the BR district, so they are permitted along the highway. And then they are permitted within 3 districts along our corridor. And again, that was just to preserve an existing pawn shop or 2 that existed when the code was adopted. They are not permitted along Tower Terrace Road. Liquor, tobacco, and vape is permitted in all commercial districts as retail sales. Our code does not specifically call out that use. Our code really takes a whole lot of, anything that sells stuff is pretty much a retail business. So we've lumped almost all those types of businesses into retail, small, medium, large, which is another item that several of you flagged. So they are allowed along Tower Terrace Road and Highway 13 as retail goods.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask this question again for those who are new to this because this is a lot. It's because of our code that is defined the way it is? Or it's the state's code, like who controls how that's labeled? Like pawn shops are pulled out of retail because they have separate reporting, right?
Essentially, basically, yes.
So who out there defines liquor, tobacco, and vape as a code? We do. So one community could define what can be sold one way and another can define it another. Up until now, this is what we've done. So, but and I know we've used this example, it's been brought up in discussion and it's a legitimate conversation. If we say there's no liquor, tobacco and vape retail sales, and then someone wants to open a wine tasting room or a whiskey and cigar tasting location to sell whatever high-end cigars and that, they would, there's no differential between that and buying beer and whatever else, right? I mean, there's,
Yes and no.
okay,
You said tasting, so that's on-site consumption. I'm gonna go to my
Okay.
time in Minnesota, they had on and off premise.
yes,
So you have on premises, you're a bar. A bar is, I don't have off the top of my head, but it's not allowed in a lot of districts. Like a Tower Terrace, I'd have to check on what the regulations are. If it's a grab your whiskey, grab your cigar and consume off premise, that would be a retail store, no different than liquor, tobacco and vape.
okay, so that's some of the differences that.
Yeah, on and off premise is how you gotta think about it.
Okay, that helps. That helps with some of the differential. And again, we are,
Correct. And now some communities will, we've only been doing this for about 2 years, lumping them into retail sales. Before, for those that were here, the old code was dance studio, vinyl record sale. I mean, it listed hundreds of different uses. And then getting away from that, well, they're all doing the same thing. They were all selling something. So we grouped them all into retail sales. Not thinking this was gonna be a use that was gonna proliferate around the community. So, I mean, it's a matter of, do we want to define that use separately, like a pawn shop or car wash or a grocery store? Or do we want to leave it as retail sales? And that's the direction we would need from the council.
and then final question is, I'm assuming that being this close to the Linmar campus, that currently these are all still allowed, these are still without of the space of being close to the school. Is there a regulation on that with how
There,
far?
yeah, there is a separation from schools. And the state actually defines what a school is. A daycare is not a school. So there are distances from the school. I think it's 200 feet. 300 feet. Rachel and I have talked about it. I mean, I can get you the exact number at the next meeting. But yeah, there are separations from schools, but that's the only really protected use. The council can protect uses from parks or playgrounds or daycares or cemeteries or churches. You can, well, the city does do that already with some uses. Separates a lot of those from others.
Okay, so as we go through this process, that's the next step probably is looking at, right, like what can we keep from having too close to the land that we own, parks, the
What do you want to
library?
protect? What do you
Yes.
feel needs to be a protected use from another use?
Perfect.
And
Thank you.
again, for example, we do that already with delayed deposit, which is your payday loan. We do that with adult uses as well. So it's not something we don't do. It's just, we don't use it widespread yet.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
So first off, I would just have to say, Sarah, I'm fascinated with the fact that you brought up a whiskey and cigar shop theme. Anyway, that was distracting me from what my real question is now. So Dave, this is just a comment, and I'm looking at pawn shop not permitted along Tower Terrace, but along Highway 13. And then comparing that to liquor, tobacco and vape permitted along Tower Terrace and 13. For some reason, I'm really fascinated ultimately to understand the logic stream that allowed pawn shop not to be permitted along Tower Terrace, but you could have a liquor, tobacco and vape shop along Tower Terrace, just that differential. I don't expect an answer to that. I just wanted to express, I just find that fascinating. I want to think about it a little bit. With Tower Terrace, I know over time that's been a controversial area as we've thought about that.
I guess, are, are we getting to a point where we need to kind of slow ourselves down and just think about Tower Terrace? And because it's gonna go on to the east of, and I know there's different standards, but that's, I guess I'm just wondering, where are we at relative to Tower Terrace? Highway 13, I think about altogether differently, given its lack of direct proximity to most housing and schools. But
Yeah, you're getting into my closing here.
I'm
So
sorry.
I'll wrap it up and
Thunder.
Ryan and Carol help me out a little bit on my closing here on the kind of the next steps and where we, where you want to take us into the future.
I'll
So,
suspend my commentary.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
any questions? Great. Second one, the deep discount store, I added again, took liberties with your list. I added this one. And then the retort popped up several times. That one was a little surprise to me. But we'll talk about it. Deep discount store, again, we have, as we explained earlier in the last few months, they're just the retail stores. They're selling goods and services, no different than any other retail store. So they are allowed really in all commercial districts, Long Tower Terrace, Highway 13, and the corridor. We talked about a lot of options in the future moving forward after the current project kind of gets going. The retort is permitted as accessory in the BC and BR districts. And when I say accessory, it means it can't be a standalone retort. It has to be associated with a primary user, which is typically going to be a funeral home. They are permitted within our manufacturing districts as a permitted right. So along Tower Terrace Road, if they're accessory to a funeral home, they would be allowed. And of course, along Highway 13. Retorts have changed quite a bit. There are now being kind of just blunt, the remains would be sent off and they'd be brought back to the funeral home and handed back to the family. Today, there are viewing rooms where the family can watch that process and then have their ceremonies there as well. So it's changed a little bit from what a retort used to be to what they are today. But they are allowed in basically the two major commercial districts. Any questions on the retort or? Several I combined here now, several brought up self-storage. We just recently updated the code on this a few years ago as kind of a result of the Green Acres project on Highway 13 and 151. Going to go briefly here. They're not allowed along Tower Terrace Road at all. All self-storage has to occur. Majority of self-storage is going to be allowed in our manufacturing districts. The only districts that's going to be allowed in would be the BR district along Highway 13. That would be with the interior storage. You can't have the garage doors, that traditional drive up and drop your stuff off and leave. It has to be all interior storage, like those big 3 and 4 story U-Haul and Green Acre storage type systems. We do allow storage units, commercial temporary in the BC district though, and BR district. Those are most often associated with seasonal sales. If we've all gone to Target or Walmart around Christmas time, they have a dozen shipping containers out there, usually for the holiday season. So that would be allowed along Tower Terrace Road with the current zoning or current land use designation. Again, those will usually come with retail uses. So as we continue to expand retail along Tower Terrace Road, it could happen seasonally, unless removed by the council. Then we do have outdoor storage, vehicle storage permanent allowed in our manufacturing districts. Questions on storage? And this is a pretty recent ordinance amendment within the last 3 years. Okay. Then we move on to outdoor sales, permanent, seasonal, and outdoor sales temporary. Outdoor sales are allowed as a conditional use in our BC and BR districts, so they are permitted along Tower Terrace Road and Highway 13. There are some district standards regarding setbacks from residential districts, screening, total coverage. As part of the conditional use process, they have to bring in a site plan and say, we want to do our outdoor sales. Sorry, I think I said storage. We want to do our outdoor sales right here. They're given a spot. That spot is approved by conditional use. They can't extend beyond that spot. We just did one not too recently for the hardware store that failed to materialize on Lincoln View Center or Lincoln View. for the Ace Hardware store. Outdoor sales temporary is also a conditional use. There, you're getting more into, I say seasonal again, but it's gonna be your, if they're outside of like a floral, you might have, one of the grocery stores or Walmart wanting to sell something outside. They can go through the conditional use process of the conditional use, and that only be allowed in the BR district. So along Highway 13 would not be permitted along Tower Terrace Road. Those temporary ones are limited to 160-day event, 230-day events to cover that, to kind of limit, and they had to apply every year if they want to do some temporary outdoor sales as a portion of their business. But mostly permanent and seasonal is what we're going to see in Marion. I'm not really familiar with any temporary sales that aren't seasonally related. So conditional use again goes to zoning board of adjustment, and they make the final determination, but there are several standards to have to deal with on that. And I should say right now we're exploring what is a propane, ice, firewood. A lot of our retail shops put that out there. We're kind of debating, is that, should that be a conditional use or not? They are permanently out there and they are outdoor sales. So that's something staff has got to explore a little bit more. And you know, as you try to create a nicer commercial development, those little use kiosks can distract from a nice building and a nice setting.
Agree. Go ahead.
Talk about that outdoor sales temporary. What about like the grocery stores like Hy-Vee where they always have pallets of pop sitting out front door?
That's the
same
kind of
type
question.
thing.
That's what we're kind of struggling with right now. It was allowed with the previous code. The new code doesn't allow it, so it's kind of a fine line. It's like, here's a business that's been doing it. We probably need to get with them and formalize it and get them on that. But that's almost year round.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's been that way since they constructed. So it's kind of a fine line of existing use and versus going forward with the new code. And I don't have an answer for that yet. All right, finally wrapping up here. The last one that was flagged quite a bit was the artist live workspace. It is not permitted on Long Tower Terrace Road or Highway 13. It's only in the Uptown District. So on Artist Live, you live upstairs, you work downstairs. It's also allowed in our manufacturing district as a conditional use. Best example I think would be Kara Briggs Pharma Synergy, or yeah, she would be somewhere that would have a heavier commercial, heavier industrial type use with welded art or welded materials. That'd be a good candidate for a conditional use in our manufacturing district. But it also works in the Uptown as well.
Go ahead.
But it also, does that also impact, I have a pottery, I'm an artist, or I weave fabrics.
Mhm.
That would fall into is not permitted in those. So
It's not permitted in the BC and VR. So it's really geared toward that single use building that has units upstairs and space downstairs. Now, the BC and BR, the BR for sure, I shouldn't speak about the BC. That does allow mixed use. So you could have commercial on the front, apartments upstairs, and you live upstairs, and you happen to own a shop. That would be allowed as well. That's not really that's a mixed use building. Not so much an artist live workspace.
okay, so I think that was the confusing parts, or that you're talking about a single building you're living in and you're doing this, not where it's actually zoned that you could live there.
Correct.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Think Uptown. Most artist live workspaces are Uptown. There are some artist live workspaces in manufacturing districts that are kind of built around that type of business, but it's not very common.
So when you say live upstairs, work downstairs, what if it's a 1-story building in our Uptown area? Can you live and work on the one floor?
The artist live work, by definition, we believe it does. This question just got raised not too long ago, and we're still researching, Nicole and I are still researching that question exactly, but we believe it does. Not settled on an answer for that one yet.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. All right, kind of wrapping up, and I can always go back to slides if you have more questions, but appreciate all the time that those that were able to get the homework in. I do appreciate it. It created a lot of uses. We got a lot more uses to go, but really the next steps here is where does the council want to go with some of these uses? I mean, I heard, gas stations came up, car washes came up, vape liquor store came up as well. I think it's 3 or 4 of the top ones that kind of rose to the top. We can have a discussion, consideration of a limited moratorium that's targeted a little bit more, may not be all encompassing of the entire city. And that would allow staff time to, research the question, provide an answer for the question, and then run it through the process of a formal approval through the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So that kind of leads into the next step, is allowing us to update the zoning code, the time to do so. We also have the bullet point got lost there, but we're also beginning the use of the update of the comprehensive plan to be completed in March 2025. So it's a little ways off, but that'll allow us the comp time, an opportunity to catch up and help provide new goals and objectives for the community, as well as most comp plans provide, hey, here's the things you can do as a community to meet these goals and objectives. So it may lay out some strategies for us. It's a little ways off, but that's something that is working through the process and will definitely drive the direction of the community. And next meeting here, I'm hoping, depending on the feedback I get from here, we'll move on to those single uses. There's probably another dozen or 16 or 17 uses that were only one person identified, and I do want to go through those as well with the council to see if they rise to a level of discussion similar to kind of these first dozen or so.
Dave, is there a way to manage, like by area, the size of a project? Well, because in my opinion, I agree with you. I think retail is retail. To me, what's more important is design standards, what the building looks like, and does it fit in the neighborhood? There are certain areas along Tower Terrace Road where maybe you could put a 20 pump gas station, but there are some areas where you don't want a 20 pump gas station. I think of areas, I think I've shared this with you, like in California where I've been, where they're tiny gas stations, but they fit into the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's more thoughtful development. I mean, is that a direction we can look at?
Can I
Is
jump
that
in?
too complex or?
No, so what you're talking about is floor area, FAR, floor area ratio is a zoning regulation that determines the massing of a building. What I think the bullet point that's missed up here that Dave alluded to, the comprehensive master plan project to begin next month, that is a huge step in the direction that council's looking for, because really the comp plan is that foundational document that springboards us into everything else as it relates to land use regulations. So that would sit there and set the 30,000 foot view of we're looking for more situations like that. We're looking for design standards implemented throughout, and that becomes our guidebook on how we implement. So then we start drilling down with code amendments to the zoning code, subdivision, site plan regulations. And so it's through that process that we would get down into those nitty gritty details. This process, so let me back up, because we're here today going through this exercise because we had a request from the neighborhood to consider a moratorium. So I don't want to lose sight of why we're here. That was something that the neighborhood said. Council listened, directed us to prepare this work. You all did your homework and has helped us get to this point. So what we're looking for is for some direction on a limited moratorium on those uses that you've identified really doesn't fit the vision, so that we can say, okay, let us continue the process with the comprehensive master plan. So then we can make sure that all the regulations that then flow from it are thought out. We're being comprehensive with those updates rather than kind of, you know, bit by bit, because you're gonna miss something if you're not, if you're talking about floor area, well, you want to talk about design standards, you want to talk about all these other things too. So this is one of those interim steps that allows this other process to play out, so then we can make sure we got the vision and we can reset, make sure the foundation's right as we move forward.
Well, and for that area specifically, I mean, I think a lot of the neighborhood at least was viewing it more, from what I was seeing, not in terms of what we're doing today as what uses don't fit. It was more, what do you see as uses that are appropriate? It was kind of the flip of that. What are the appropriate uses for this area, or the most desirable uses for this area, as opposed to what don't we want in this area?
In land use you know, you talk about the character of a community. The character is the feel. So Councilwoman Menser was talking about different zoning codes. Who determines it? And Dave said, you all determine it. Why do you determine it? You determine it because you are identifying the look and feel of the community. And the way you determine that look and feel of a community is through your land use regulations. Comp plan sets the vision, the zoning code and all those regulations flow from it and actually implement that look and feel. You implement that look and feel, lot size, building size, design standards, all those uses, where those uses are appropriate and where those uses are not appropriate. I can't stress enough how important the comp plan process will be to our community, making sure that the vision that we are implementing is in fact aligned with what our community is looking for.
And I will, as we work through the new comprehensive plan, we've got an adopted comprehensive plan that does lay out commercial as appropriate here, and we have zoning out there that says these uses are appropriate. So there's kind of a, it's hard to wait for that new comp plan. So we, you know, the decision will be made to help give us time to start researching that and allow the new comp plan to work through, because our comp plan does say a car wash or a gas station is appropriate on any part of Tower Terrace, the way the comp plan is laid out today and the zoning is today. So, I mean, it's a matter of.
So what are you hoping to walk away from today from council?
I think it's a matter of, do you want to see moratorium in some form to allow staff that time to work the comprehensive plan, work our zoning code updates,
right,
or do we want to go right into code amendments? I need some direction. I mean, that's a big step to take. So obviously it's not something we can make.
That's prudent. And if that's what we need for you to be able to set things in motion to implement the overall vision of the council, I think I would be in support. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I can come up with a few ideas. I probably already mentioned them already, that where I would think it'd be appropriate for a limited moratorium, for example, on the Center Corridor and Tower Terrace. But can you give us the definition of when you talk limited moratorium? So let's say that's in place tomorrow and somebody comes in and wants to do something that is included in that. Can they do that if they make a presentation to the city council and we listen to it and we go, oh yeah, that sounds okay, and maybe there's some changes that we weren't thinking about? Can they still do it if we agree to it within a limited moratorium? Or is it no way, Jose?
I'll allow the city attorney to address that question.
So with a limited moratorium in general, that would be done by an ordinance and would essentially serve as a temporary suspension or a temporary amendment of our zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So there's not a ton of guidance as far as exactly what our parameters are there. And so we could tailor it to allow essentially for what it might be a little bit tricky, but what we could do would be to allow for we already have to allow for vested interest, which we talked about before when the request first came in. We could allow for some reconsideration points within there This is generally the only time where you're going to see a provision for a temporary ordinance, because what happens is this is in place just long enough for us to do that comp plan, and then we either make the change or revert to the zoning that we have in place right now. So that's something that we need the direction essentially to how you would want us to tailor that.
And council has the ability to, it's no different than the UTV ordinance. UTVs were not allowed, state law now allowed it. Council decided to opt in. You evaluated it to make a determination whether or not it still met the needs, or did you need to amend it? So having a limited moratorium, you give us a direction, we'll go back, we'll make sure that we're bringing forward whatever we need to bring forward back to council to consider and have that approval, which then says, okay, if that list that's on the screen now, council says that's the list that we have some heartburn over, and we want to have that limited moratorium on to allow the comp plan process to play out, allow for any other research that needs to happen so that we can make sure we're hitting the mark right the first time without getting behind the 8 ball, then that's what it would be. And then if Kara works her legal magic with the language, and if there was something, I mean, there is always the ability to make the appeal to the city council to sit there and say, hey, this moratorium would prevent us from doing that. Here's our concept. Council would have the ability to amend it at such time.
Okay, so I mean, at this point, I mean, I'm not concerned. I'm not gonna put every one of those on a moratorium list, at least from my standpoint. I don't think they all need it. Some do. So I mean, how do you get to this point of what
Is
everybody up
there,
here likes or doesn't like?
well, with that list, not everything, it wouldn't be, are there certain areas where that list, like Tower Terrace has come up quite a bit?
Yes.
So is that list specific to the Tower Terrace zoning district? Because Councilman Jensen, you're accurate. I mean, a lot of those uses throughout the community are great, yeah. But perhaps from the vision standpoint, it doesn't, you don't want to include it in a particular zoning district because it doesn't meet that vision.
Go ahead, Grant.
So I'm just, actually, I'm thinking about how you manage this and, you know, the plan of attack and the sequence of attack on this. So let's just say that generally speaking, for these kind of uses, we want to have a limited moratorium, but then approach the work to decision the details from comp plan and all the way down, do it in some logical geographic sequence. Like, I've heard Tower Terrace a couple times, right? Maybe that's the hot spot. And so then we focus real tight on that as fast as we can and button that up and then go to a different area. I don't know if that makes any sense or if it's legally possible.
It does from the sequence standpoint, and there's the reason why Tower Terrace, Central Corridor, and Highway 13 have been identified as kind of the focus for this conversation. Because those are the 3 areas we've heard from you all of, okay, these are some important commercial areas. These are some important growth areas for us. And these are the areas where, you know, as we're implementing a vision, we want to make sure that it's accurate. And we get one shot at it.
And we want to be proactive.
Correct.
So that we're not reacting every time a project is coming through. And yeah, and 20 years from now, we all want to look back to say, you know, we did it the right way, and look, it developed. And the reason why those 3 areas are the concern is because they're quickly becoming attractive for development or redevelopment in the Central Corridor. And we get, like you said, we get one chance to do it right for the next several generations. And we want to do it right because it's good for the entire community. So
Councilman Harper's comment is correct. And the first question is, the list that many of you have, you shared, that list that's up on the screen, is that a list that seems like you want to, we're not sure that that belongs in every zoning district?
So, Randy and then Sarah and then Gage.
I think that was a question from the city manager. I think we should validate, and I would say, in my opinion, we're in the right direction. I think we're all struggling for the same vein here. I think what we're all trying to, at least for myself, is to say, I have a vision of what Tower Terrace would look like in my mind. And I think I share that because I've heard of the same theme go through a lot of people's minds. We've all traveled to Arizona, California, West Des Moines, Clive, where you go down this beltway and it's the same theme all the way through the city. Now, I think we ought to have a drugstore within walkable means of all residences. So therefore, my thought is we should have a master plan that says, yes, we should have a pharmacy here, here, and here. But this is what the build out will look like. Now, who wants to go in and occupy that? Just like what the mayor had said. And it doesn't look like, we've got the stereotype of, if we say we want a drugstore, we got 3 drugstore chains that have built a cookie cutter retail store over and over and over. That is not what my thought or my look is for that corridor. So if we had that theme to say, yes, this is what it's going to look like, it's going to be 15,000 square feet and it's got to fit within these parameters, but this is our vision. Now, who wants to plug and play and drop into those spots? Everybody's got an equal share to it, but at least we have a vision to it. Because like what we've all said is all of a sudden people are wanting to buy the property, they're wanting to build, they're wanting to put their entity in there. And it's really not what our vision of what the residential neighborhood looks like, or, we should all have, everybody should have that capability to walk to get their drugs and get a gallon of milk, but it doesn't have to look the same as what it looks like on our 7th Avenue. In that theme. Now, I could be standing on my own on this particular one, but that's my thought, because you're right. I think there should be a saturation level that says, yes, there should only be so many car washes in this particular area. There should only be, so many drugstores, and everybody can participate. I know we've all been down those same roads, and I know you all have that vision in your mind of, because they're very attractive. They're very complementary to the neighborhood. It's a great buffer between retail and residential. So it's hard for me to look at this and say, we're trying to do the zoning, we're trying to do the master comprehensive plan over here. We've got current tenants. It's tough for me to say, I want to go in and select a moratorium on particular ones. I don't know if that's, I kind of wish we could just overlay this whole thing and put a pause on it, because we don't have this where we need to be to drive it, in my opinion, but that's a lot. I'm sorry. I'm trying to catch up for the last 10 minutes here. A lot of the side comments, because I think we're all in the same, I think we're all talking the same language.
Yep. And that is the challenge, right? Because development happens, and that is why you want to make sure your regulations are up to date. You want to make sure your foundational documents, your guiding principle documents, comp plan are up to date. So what the moratorium does is gives us that breathing room to get out and do that research, to let that comp plan process play out. So that's why the basis of this homework was to identify, as elected officials, what are those uses that you really have concerns with? And we've selected those 3 corridors because that's what we've been hearing about quite a bit. So that's where we're drilling down. If council wants us to start looking at something else, we can. What I would suggest is looking at those uses and saying we're comfortable with that list as a moratorium list. That's not saying that it's throughout the community, but what we would suggest is zeroing it down into those zoning districts that you have concerns about, Tower Terrace, 13, or Central Corridor, all of them, select ones, and say, look, in this area, we gotta catch our breath. We gotta do that work with the comp plan. We gotta have an understanding what the community wants. We gotta have the time to make sure that those regulations are in place so we can do exactly what you just said.
I'm totally in favor of everything that we just talked about as far as casting a net over all of that as a moratorium
It-
or whatever
it-
direction we need to do to lead that.
Yeah, and remember, we're here because the neighborhood had asked specifically in Tower Terrace, and we wanted to make sure we were comprehensive of the comments that we've heard from elected officials over the last 2 years. So the moratorium is a short term, while the comp plan becomes a middle term, and then the implementation of the comp plan is that long term.
Totally agree.
I echo any what you're saying, and I think you've summarized a little bit of what's in my head. I feel like, and I don't mean to speak for all of you, I feel like we've got a vision. We're not the experts on how that gets done to prevent some of the things that are happening. And we're asking like, how do we do this? Please help us take what we're explaining as this vision of what we want to see and tell us. And so I think, I feel like I'm so in the weeds with this right now that I'm in your space instead of kind of like, tell me how to change that zoning. I don't know how you change the zoning. I don't know how you can take this and prevent some of the things we don't want from happening because we're not zoning experts, or what's available and best practices in other communities, or how did some of these communities who did exactly what we're talking about wanting to have happen, how did they do it that we're unable to? And why are we being reactive to it? Especially when we know Tower Terrace Road, it's not a surprise it went through. In fact, it's kind of behind in schedule. So, how do we do this, but then at the same time, start looking forward in the rest of the community? I mean, I know we're kind of triaging this, but how do we then take the rest of the road? What about the little section of Tower Terrace Road that's west of the roundabout? What's the next section of road we have to be dealing with? What's the next development we've got to be dealing with so this doesn't happen again? And this is probably what's happening that you're leading us through. But our community doesn't also know that either. And so we have to keep kind of explaining why we're doing this, but it's I feel like I'm kind of pulling down into the weeds of some things that we need to understand to carry forward, but we're still there. So backing up, I agree with you. I think there's a little bit of a weirdness in this, in the fact that I think we see different things and different reasons for different businesses being a moratorium on Tower Terrace versus Highway 13 versus the corridor. So is it possible to direct it to us, or do we have to say, okay, first up, I mean, I'm going to say Tower Terrace, it's in my ward, but anybody else can jump in and pick another one. Let's talk about Tower Terrace. What do we have to do there? Okay, now let's look at Highway 13. What are we going to, instead of talking about this here, can we identify steps 1, 2, 3 and talk about them independently? Because I think we're all like.
Yep.
I agree with Sarah. I mean, that's sort of the discomfort I have with all of this, is that we're not the expert. And, I'm happy to have you come and say, here's what we recommend you guys do. And this is with my, all the harping I've done on Highway 13 and the metal buildings going up on Highway 13. I've wanted, come to us and say, here's what we need to do to prevent that. And, and then we can weigh in on it. Go ahead.
So that is exactly what we're doing right here. We need to understand what you don't like so we can then bring the recommendations forward.
Good.
So that's why this exercise of so we need to understand and take our cues from you on what are the things you don't like in those areas. So we've got that list. So now it's, do you want to entertain that list as a moratorium in any of those zoning districts?
Yes. Easy way to do that. Go ahead.
Generally, I am okay with the moratorium for all of those uses. The key thing being is that it's a proactive moratorium, and I'll compare it to what Lynn County had kind of gone through over the past few years with their utility scale solar ordinance, and it's a little different, of course. But at the end of the day, what they were doing, all of their solar ordinance was based in zoning code, and the difference, and it was not a fault of their own because it just kind of all snowballed, was they had to do that out of being reactive. At first it started with a project from Culinera and Coggin, and then all of a sudden Dwayne Arnold and NextEra wanted to do 4 major solar projects, and that created a lot of kind of chaotic public meetings that lasted hours, that I covered as a journalist for a couple of years, and they lasted a couple of years. So I think as long as there's a clearly defined kind of timeline, whether it's a 3-month like moratorium or it's a 6-month moratorium, I think being proactive is really great, because similar to what Lynn County had to do, their moratorium gave them a chance to take a step back. They established a committee looking at the zoning codes that were made up of different parties, and then they were able to come forward with recommendations to make their zoning stronger. And so we're doing this before it even gets to a point of full rooms and angry people. So I think it's really good, and I'm okay with the proactive moratorium. I just would like to know what the timeline of that would look like and what that work would look like.
So I've got my analytical hat on, and I've got a proposal on how to get to an end result of this. So I'm thinking I've got a picture of an Excel spreadsheet in my head. You take all of those uses in column A, you got 3 headings at the top: Tower Terrace, Central Corridor, and Highway 13. You give that sheet to each city council person, have them check which ones they think they want a moratorium for in each of those areas. Because a few of the city council people, unfortunately, did not get input on all of this. So I think that gives everybody now an opportunity to give the input. So I'm not sure everybody would want a moratorium on every one of these in every one of those 3 areas, but at least that would get you a way to find out at least where everybody thinks what the majority are. If there's only 2 or 3, maybe you pass on it. But if you got super majority, then that's a pretty easy decision. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
And my recommendation was gonna be focusing on Tower Terrace, just because that is the neighborhood asked us to look at it. And that is the commentary that we've heard the most about.
True.
Yeah, please do.
And the one relief is we do have the design standards in place now. I think we saw how the Dollar Tree project evolved from where it started to where it actually ended in terms of design. So the design is gonna tackle the Highway 13 issue that you brought about the Miller buildings. That won't occur anymore because of the design standards in there. So we've addressed the design part, I think, pretty good on most of the community. So now it's boiling down to the uses and the impact that those uses may have on the neighborhood. So I think they're all gonna look like I think they're all gonna look really great now. It's just how they operate, and is that use appropriate?
I don't, from my perspective, without a shadow of a doubt, I have no problem going with a moratorium and blanket everything. That's just my opinion.
I agree. I'm with that.
There's too much at stake, too much territory, too much ground. I have no problem with that, in my opinion.
When you say just to clarify, blanket those 3 districts
Correct.
with those.
Correct, from what we've been talking about. Yeah,
I've seen 3 heads nod. 4.
Will, me. Yeah. Right. Gage. Yeah. You have something?
I do.
Go ahead.
Well, and just to tail on to that, a consideration if what's first up is Tower Terrace, a consideration relative to car washes there. However, whatever, we need to soak through is also going to inform similar decisions in other areas. So it's like there's going to be some advanced thinking that informs other districts. My question, however, is comprehensive plan project to begin October next month with completion in March of 2025. That's nominally what, 18 months?
Yeah, that's pretty appropriate. It's about a year and a half process.
Is that aggressive or is that leisurely?
No, a year and a half is really a good mark to shoot for a comprehensive plan.
Is
A
there?
year is fast. A year and a half is optimal. 2 years. I've seen them done in 2 years. It's a long time to be talking about. It's hard to keep engagement on a 2-year project like that, but a year and a half's, I think, more than appropriate. I don't think it's too aggressive at all.
And just for the record, interim zoning and moratoria have been upheld for terms of a year and a half to 2 years. But as Ryan said, with any of our amendments, we can amend them as we go as well. So if we decide that we put this moratorium in on tobacco and vape shops, but we need to amend it because we have a convenience store somewhere in there, a neighborhood grocery that also happens to sell alcohol, and we want to allow that, maybe we need to change our wording. Or if we get the comp plan information and we want to terminate one of the moratoria early, we can do that as well. I think my recommendation would be, even if we do a blanket, we write them separately for each of the areas, so that if we want to make a change for one area, we don't have to separate that out within each of the areas. We can just do it by area.
That would make sense.
We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what development's gonna come or,
Right.
but what we do know is we've heard from our elected officials that there's some uses that are concerning. So, and we've heard from a neighborhood asking the council, consider a moratorium. This allows us to catch our breath, get control of the situation, let the analysis play out. And as, when we bring back the recommendation for a comp plan consultant next month, you better believe that kickoff meeting that we have with them is going to be, hey, let us tell you about what exercise we just went through, because this is really, really important to our community. And we want you to understand that and work on our behalf.
And I think the background on this also too is just, you know, for the period of time that this would be, you know, in place, it doesn't mean that communications and collaboration doesn't stop. I mean, there can still be those that have interest, and it could be a lot of collaboration on us to help build that vision and be a part of that as well too. So just because we're asking for a moment to allow council to grasp on what that vision is going to look like, it doesn't mean that those interested parties would not be able to follow through. Just may look a little different.
There will also be 3 readings unless you waive some. So if we bring back what we think the direction is now, and council through discussion determines you want us to change that, we have an opportunity to do that as well. And we can have pending final passage.
And one thing that this council has done that is very commendable is that when you put together an ordinance like UTV, like ATE, you've said, hey, we're gonna look at it in 6 months. We're gonna look at it on a yearly basis. So, you know, you start off with the moratorium on a year timeframe to allow the comp plan to play out. You know, it's certainly worth having it 6 months. Let's take a look. How's it going? What kind of inquiries have we had? Is there anything that we need to be thinking about, reconsidering? So we have that ability. But again, it puts the council, the elected body, in the driver's seat to make sure that the vision that you've been elected to implement is taking shape.
This has been very helpful, and I know a lot of work has been put into this. and
Thank you
it's-
very much.
It's brought us to a total different spot here to pause, and like Shara says, we're down deep into your world now for those of us that carry other careers to get into this for a bit and for us to make some good decisions. So thank you.
I'm gonna build on that because you're gonna segue me really good. If you like this format, hated this format, let Ryan, Kim, myself know, I can change it. We have to do this again because Sarah and Gage had quite a few uses they wanted to talk about as well they were the only ones that flagged them. So I do want to bring those uses forward as well to the council. So we can have that discussion. But again, I just wanted to focus on the ones that came up, rose to the top. But we'll have to do this again. So if you hated this format, please let Ryan, Kim, or myself know. I can change it up a little bit for the next
Well,
step in this process.
And
So
I'm sorry that I didn't provide responses because of my
you were
3-week
welcome
my
back.
3-week vacation and preparing for
Yep.
that, but I still intend to provide some input, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think-
Go ahead.
But now that you've trained us,
Okay.
the next time we go through for the single-use ones, we promise to be more efficient.
Do appreciate all your work and taking this subject seriously, and I think it's gonna end up being great for the future of the community, so thank you so much. Okay. Now we are
That's a hard act to follow.
Go ahead.
Rita Packingham, Purchasing Coordinator. So going along with our strategic plan of effective and efficient government, we're looking at a purchasing card program. I want to give you some statistics. So commercial cards help save time and money by automating the low value spend that makes up 80% of transactions. In 2021, payments by check made up 66% of fraud. I know it's a high number. The purchasing card program offers $100,000 liability insurance per cardholder. And the city is not responsible for fraudulent use of cards. So the purchasing card program will replace our current business credit cards. On the screen, you'll see the terms. So how did we get here? So we went out for an RFP. We got 4 responses. We evaluated the 4 vendors that responded, and I want to thank Councilmember Randy and Grant for being part of the evaluation team along with the city staff. We narrowed it down to 2 vendors, and then we selected JP Morgan. So I do have some JP Morgan staff here tonight. So I have Rochelle and Nancy.
Welcome.
Happy to have them here from Des Moines and Minneapolis. And virtually, I have a couple of other staff members, Ricardo and Nick. So we are estimating that we will have about $3 million of annual spend that will on the purchasing cards, which will get approximately a 1.35% rebate back on that spend. So about $33,000 plus a $10,000 signing bonus in the first year. So why did we pick JP Morgan? The biggest reason probably was that the city we've never had a purchasing card program here, and we needed to make it really easy for our purchasers and for the directors, because now we're going to introduce a new tool and a new program. And so the software that was presented to us was very efficient, and it was built from a user perspective. So it was going to be an awesome tool. Also, their customer service support was 24/7 by 365 days a year with an average response time of 20 seconds. So that was pretty impressive. This is an example of one of the screens, the dashboard screens. And one of the things you might note is there's a section for action items. So it's very quick for like a director to see what their action items are. One thing I want to point out is that purchasing card program is more than just a credit card. So think of it as like today with a credit card, you go make a purchase with your credit card. With a P card, you will make your purchase, you will go online, you will do your coding, you will get approvals of your transactions online, and you will pass that information on to our financial software. So it's much more. Any questions?
Questions so
Kind of
far?
went through that fast.
Go ahead.
No, just a few comments, and I'm sorry if you're not done. I'm gonna just jump in here. I want to thank you, Rita, Leanne, your department, all of the staff. And thank all of the vendors and the companies that participated in that RFP. It was a very large learning curve for me, and I got a financial background as well too. And this card You can control the parameters of how it's being spent. You can control the categories of purchases. It can actually be done with large transactions that are interdepartment. So it's not just point of sale. It's actually purchases from municipality to municipality, things of that nature. So this is a very large, I think this is a great entry. Super excited to be working with JP Morgan, providing we go forward here. And I just wanted to kind of share my thoughts on that as well too. Thanks for allowing me to sit in on this and weigh in on some of those decisions and having a little bit of a little bit more scope on that. I know Grant might have some more comments on this, but I just wanted again too, this is just another step and tool that Team Marion's going to be able to utilize. It's going to allow the bookkeeping to move more efficiently, have more transparency and work extremely quick through those processes. So again, kudos to you, staff and departments, and look forward to seeing what the rest of the council thinks. So thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Rita, I just, I wasn't able to fully participate in all of this evaluation, but for our guests here from JP Morgan, one of the points that I did recognize relative to your proposal is, you represented that you had the organizational enterprise capability and competency to handle this. I mean, let's face it, JP Morgan is a pretty well-known name. So the advantage in terms of the information interface, data transfer and the like, I think will bode well for us at the local level. So I just, Rita, I don't have any concern about this. And I know, Terrell, you gave us some input in terms of the data security standpoint. And I think there was compliance that was shown quite well by JP Morgan on this. So I endorse this certainly.
Anyone else? I just want to say thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I mean, I don't have any questions because we've talked about this quite a bit over the years. We've wanted something like this. Randy and I have been on here a long time, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. And I see this as just another milestone in the process of our growing up as a city to reach this level and having this type of a program. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. I look forward to working with you. Okay, let's go back on the agenda, items A1 through A6. Any questions on those? All right, we'll go on to A8. Leanne?
Yes, I just marked this one for discussion because it's not a normal consent agenda item. This is simply to formalize an agreement with DA Davidson surrounding the services they're providing as it relates to bond disclosures.
Questions? Okay, thank you, Leanne. A9 through A11, any questions? If not, then we'll move on to C1, Chief.
Yes, sir. We're looking to re-up our car camera program. The contract we currently have with Axon ends in July. We wanted to get it in front of council now for budgeting purposes and to take advantage of some pricing that they offered us. It represents about a 28% increase over what we paid the previous 5 years. It's $167,000. What that gets us though is sticking with Axon. Our car cameras are integrated with our body cameras. The car cameras will turn the body cameras on if the officer forgets to do it or misses the button when he gets out if he's in a hurry. The downloading is seamless. It makes it easier when we get records requests that we can look at one system, pull both car and body camera up because they show up right next to each other. We've been happy with the service that we've had the last 5 years. The one thing that this new system does have is every squad car will have automated license plate readers in them. Those cameras will run plates in basically a 180-degree arc as the officers are driving down the street. It'll be running plates in front of it and to the sides of it. If we get a hit being something off of NCIC, being a stolen car or a car that's been entered in connection with a crime that somebody's looking for, it'll pop up on the officer's screen within seconds, and then they can turn around and find that car. It also works with like Amber Alerts and missing people. We can create our own, what we call a hot sheet every day when we're looking for specific cars. If we've seen vehicles that are involved in burglaries, for instance, that we want to stop those people and identify them, we can enter that in there. So overall, it's about an $8,000 a year increase from what we were paying the last 5 years. But I think for what we're getting, that's a reasonable cost given the inflation rates and everything else.
Questions for Chief?
Chief, I know we'd had conversations in the past about the plate readers with that. We don't have plate readers currently, right? This would be a new addition to our fleet.
Correct. That was one of the options on one of the vendors for the ATE cameras had the plate readers. They were going to let us use it for 6 months. We've got that option down the road to add it with the ones we have now, but if we've got them in the cars, we may be in pretty good shape.
Great. Again, one more tool to add to our public safety. So thank you.
Your Honor. So Chief, just on that automated license plate reader, is the return on that fast enough that if there's a necessary apprehension, it can be done within close proximity to that vehicle that was sensed?
Yes, sir. There's several agencies in Iowa that are already using the Axon system. We sent a couple of officers up to Waterloo. Waterloo's using them, and they raved about them, about how good they are and how quick.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Chief.
Change my behavior.
All right, C2 through F3 on the next page are not marked. Any questions on those? Okay, on the abstention calendar, there's nothing marked for discussion. Any questions on those? If there are any, I'll turn it over to the Mayor Pro Tem. All right, regular agenda A1 and E1, any questions? All right, F1, Dave.
Yes, this is a proposed elevation change, revised final site development plan for the revised elevation change of the Holiday Inn Express and Suites. It was approved a few months ago by the city council. As they've begun to value engineer the project, they're looking at some cost saving measures. One that came up was reduction in the window widths from 8 feet to 5 feet. And that would shrink up obviously the air conditioning unit for each unit. And then it would revise a little bit of the panel system on the building. They're 4x8 sheets. I'm sorry, 8x5. They're 4x8 sheets of panel. They'd have to revise those slightly. It'd be the same relief, same panel, but they have to be cut differently to fit the reduced window sizes on a portion of the building as well. So it's still the same panel, just a little different cut, just to accommodate the new windows. I should have got up, sorry. So the rendering on the first rendering there is what was approved on the top image, revised image. And it's just a sampling of the building. They've reduced to the 5-foot window. Next slide then, please.
You said it went from 8 to 5?
8 to 5 is what they're proposing. And then the terracotta panels would change slightly on the cuts. Again, they're still be 4x8 sheets, but the relief lines would change slightly to just fit the window, the reduced window widths. Planning and Zoning Commission met last month and they did recommend approval.
Do you have any concerns yourself about?
No, we were generally supportive of it. They met all the other conditions prior.
They have a date set or a target date for groundbreaking?
I think they're already starting moving dirt out there. I'm not sure if they have a formal groundbreaking.
Oh, okay. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll approve it, but I don't like it. I don't like the smaller windows. But it's not enough to keep the project from moving forward, but don't want our comments.
Yeah.
I like the bigger windows.
Second, yeah. I'm with you.
Okay, F2, any questions? All right, we'll move on to the closed session. Sure.
Mayor, move to approve. To adjourn the closed session regarding real estate transactions as permitted under sections 21.51J of the Code of Iowa.
Second,
Been moved by Councilmember Sternat, seconded by Member Menser to adjourn the closed session regarding real estate transactions as permitted under section 21.51J of the Code of Iowa. May we have the legal counsel's statement, please?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed session and find the same to be appropriate under Iowa Code, section 21.51J.
Thank you. Any discussion before we vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Miskman,
Yes.
Mr. Jensen,
Yes.
Mr. Harper,
Yes.
Mayor Abalosely.
Yes.
Mr. Brandt.
Yes.
Ms. Menzer,
yes.
Mr. Sterned.
Yes.
Thank you. We're now adjourned to closed session. Thank you for joining us.